So, do you have any questions about any of it? I know we talked a little bit about this before we started the quiz. Like, do you have any questions about any of this stuff coming up?
No.
Okay, since it's just us today,
Mm-hmm.
also, you might as well run your paper idea by me now.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see what we got here.
It will be explain a little bit more about this.
Okay.
Since I turned it in, right?
Okay. Okay, I think it's good that you have these others to compare, these other examples to compare to. I think that's solid. But I think that like the big thing that you're gonna need to do here, right, is not just argue that Celine is an unreliable narrator, but why it matters that his narrative doesn't match up with the historical record, and what's unique or interesting about Celine as an unreliable narrator. Right, so like, how is he different from, say, the narrator of The Telltale Heart, right? Because, the narrator of The Telltale Heart, we know, is, trying to justify, like, we actually don't know whether the narrator is a man or a woman in that story.
Yeah.
Right? It's, is trying to justify the killing of the old man, right? And it's, this the same thing, like, if you look at a Poe story like The Black Cat, I don't know if you've ever read that one. Well, the narrator is constantly talking about how, he is the gentlest of people, or was the gentlest of people, but his actual behavior with other people and animals, even as he describes it, doesn't match up with that, right? Right? His concept of himself doesn't match with his actions. So focus on what Salim's narrative doesn't match up to, and why that's important, and then you'll have a solid thesis.
Okay.
But yeah, I think on the whole it's a good idea.
Okay. And I made those arguments, I put in the proposal, so I can see the comments, and I could just start writing those comments now, so I can avoid making that mistake again.
So I will read the proposal that you've given me tomorrow morning, and I'll get back to you with feedback by the afternoon.
So we need a narrative, and what makes it what?
What does Salim's narrative not match up with, right? Is it with his own actions? Is it with actual history? Is it with both? And come up with an explanation as to why I should care about that, right? Why that matters.
Okay.
All right, so let's finish up then with the God of Small Things. So how'd this last bit of this go for you?
I hate baby, which, can I pronounce the name?
Uh-huh.
I don't like how she manipulated the kids.
Yeah.
Just so they could confess to an accident that happened.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, I can't remember the dang child that drowned. What's her name again?
So Sophie Mole, who was loved from
Yeah.
the beginning. Yeah.
I hate that she was manipulating them. You did this out of jealousy and stuff like that. It was an accident though.
Exactly.
It's they couldn't do anything. They're kids. At that age, have they confirmed their age?
They're 7.
At that age, you don't know what's right from wrong, and because she's manipulating them, it's they don't want their mom to go to jail.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was an accident. I can understand with the whole Baloo, that was on purpose. The cops beat him.
Yeah. Although they actually also didn't mean to kill him.
No, but
and
they had the wrong person though.
Yeah, well, if it's not even that they had the wrong person. Baby Kochama gave them a false report, right?
And that's what she was trying to protect herself from.
She accused Velutha of raping Amu.
Which never happened.
Which, didn't happen. It was consensual.
Yep.
And that's the bind that Baby Kochama has herself in, right? The police chief tells us, like, look, we just beat an innocent man to death. We are going to have to answer for that unless you can get these kids to confess, and then you are going to have to answer for having given a false report, right? So she, she's trying to get herself out of the shit, right?
Yeah.
And there's a line in one of the last chapters about the self-centeredness of children. And remember that Baby Kochama is not her name, right? It's what everyone in the family calls her.
But she's a child.
Exactly. She's an overgrown child, right? She's an old woman, still a virgin.
Yeah. She's miserable.
Yeah. Who has always been referred to as apparently has always been self-centered, right? When she's writing those letters back home from the convent, she refers to she talks about how unhappy the Koh-i-Noor is. Right? The Koh-i-Noor is a large, famous diamond. But her father, who was also called the Blessed Child, remember, right? Used to say that that his Koh-i-Noor was what was most valuable to him. And she assumes that means her, right? Even though it takes several letters home before the family realizes that she's talking about herself when she's complaining about the Koh-i-Noor, right? What we have there, is the unhappiness of an overgrown child, right? Taking it out on actual children. I want to go quickly here. Where was I? Just read this, right? So on page 318, when it's describing Velutha and Amu's encounter in the history house, right? Once he was inside, her fear was derailed and biology took over. The cost of living climbed to unaffordable heights, though later, Baby Kochama would say it was a small price to pay. Was it? 2 lives, 2 children's childhoods, and a history lesson for future offenders. So the cost of Amu's love affair with Velutha, which is apparently a very short duration, right? They have sex for the first time on the day Sophie Mole comes.
Yeah.
And a few days later, Sophie Mole is dead, right?
I don't know, the book got confusing at some points, are we fast forward, are we going backwards? I was like, how does these events correspond with each other? That's what.
Yeah, because everything's out of order.
Yeah,
right?
I'm like.
Yeah, and you've got the 1969 timeline. You've got the 1997 timeline.
You just have so
1990. Yeah, so and plus you've got all of these things that happened to family members in the past, right? You've got Chaco's history with Margaret Kochama. You've got Baby Kochama's wooing of Father Mulligan by washing poor children and then joining a convent. So and what this is actually trying to mimic is the way trauma victims experience reality, right? That the trauma kind of continually replays itself under whatever is going on in your present life, right? And the fragmentation of the narrative also mirrors the fragmentation of the family, right? So by the end of this, we have Chaco goes to Canada. Sophie Mole is dead. Margaret Kochama presumably goes back to England. Mamachi dies. Amu dies. Esta is sent off. He is sent back to his father. Rahel is stuck in the house with a family that resents her until she finally grows up and can leave, and then comes back, right?
Yeah.
Because she can't find a place for herself anywhere else.
Is that where the love law part come in around that time?
Well, we've been talking about the love laws throughout, right? You know, whom it is permissible to love and how much. So why is it not permissible, for example, for Amu to love Velutha?
Because he's a servant.
What's that?
I guess because he's like somebody of the lower class caste system.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody outside the caste system, right? So yeah, because his social status is untouchable, right? He is literally, for someone like Amu, untouchable. He is outside of the circle of approved partners. But there's kind of a weird irony, I think, in the way Rahel and Esta come together at the end of the novel, right? Because we're told this is a violation of the love laws. However, what do we know about what the love laws permit? Do the love laws permit you to love people outside of your little closed circle?
Good.
Baby Kachama can't love Father Mulligan, right? Because he's a monk, right?
The house.
Yeah. Margaret Kachama's relationship with Chaco doesn't work out because too different, right?
Yeah.
Amu cannot love Velutha because he's untouchable, right? And we're told early on that in the Syrian Orthodox Christian families in India, inbreeding is relatively common because there is such a small circle of people who are approved marriage partners, right? So there's this. So the love laws appear to, as the novel understands them, appear to be, and I can't recall if I introduced these words to you before. Do you know what endogamous and exogamous marriages are? Okay. So an endogamous marriage, so endo means inside or within. An endogamous marriage is one in which one has to marry within one's own clan or tribe, right? And this seems to be the norm in these Syrian Orthodox families, right? You're supposed to marry another Syrian Orthodox person, but because there's such a small community in India, this means that most of them are probably already related to you, even if distantly. Whereas an exogamous marriage, right? Exo means outside. So an exogamous marriage or an exogamous relationship is when you are expected to marry outside of your tribe or clan. And Rahel and Esta, I would say, are arguably obeying their family's love laws in the most literal possible way. Now they're doing so out of trauma, right?
Yeah.
And out of desperation and need, and like having been separated from each other too young. And having had to live through all of this horrible shit together.
That's
right?
what it does.
What's that?
Trauma does that.
Yeah.
You can try to date somebody out of trauma and then realize it don't work.
Yeah.
Trauma's an interesting thing.
If we look on page 311 here, right? The end of the last sentence of that first paragraph on the page, right? only that what they shared that night was not happiness, but hideous grief. Right? There's no joy in this pairing, just this grief that hangs over them that has to be exorcised, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, we also learn here why Esther doesn't speak. Mm-hmm. Which of them was chosen to go into the police and tell the lie about Velutha?
Rahel? No.
Not Rahel.
It was Esther.
Yeah, Esther is the one who's taken into the room with Velutha's broken, beaten body, right?
Yep.
They turn on the light and they tell him, and he has to tell, yes,
You have to tell the lie that baby Kachana.
Yeah, yes, Velutha kidnapped us and assaulted our mother and so on and so forth, right? Mm-hmm. So, because he shamed Velutha mm-hmm. and essentially kind of broke up the family through speech, mm-hmm. he doesn't talk anymore, right? Mm-hmm. And everything, he's got to pile everything up nice and orderly, mm-hmm. And keep everything clean, mm-hmm. and keep everything organized, right? I mean, yeah, he essentially kind of behaves like an obsessive compulsive, right? Mm-hmm. With the addition of a refusal to speak. Right? Not that he can't speak, he just doesn't.
He doesn't want to.
Yeah.
Trump does that too.
Yeah. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about two concepts that have been touched on here a few times, but that we haven't really gone into yet. So one thing I do want to talk about is the art of Kathakali, which comes up a couple of times here. Do you have any idea what this is? Okay, so we're told that on the Paradise Pickles label, right, there's a Kathakali dancer. Mm-hmm. And there is a point at which Rahel and Esther sit and watch a Kathakali performance mm-hmm. at a nearby temple, right? So Kathakali is a form of dance drama that is specific to Kerala. Mm-hmm. So it is, on the one hand, right, it's very much a regional phenomenon, right? Mm-hmm. It's one of the things that Kerala is specifically known for, and it's not something that's done elsewhere. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I think is important about it is that so these are stories told without speech. Mm-hmm. They're communicated through dance. The dancers wear elaborate costumes, masks, makeup, and a lot of the movements that they make are very tiny movements, right? Each gesture is meant to convey a particular meaning. Sometimes they're just small finger gestures. Sometimes their facial movements are very, very important. So I'm going to show you quickly an example of a Kathakali performance. And the stories are taken from Hindu mythology. And this particular story is about a demoness who falls in love with a virtuous son of the god Indra. And when she's spurned by him, she flies into a rage, and he is forced to, assumes her demon form, and he kills her. Oh, right, I gotta turn it on. this is the gong. And that's the Venus. Yeah, the dancers never speak, right? Any narration is provided by the musicians. But as is the case with, like, say, Greek tragedy, local audiences, at least, that would be watching this, would already know the story. And this is just so this is only about a 7.5 minute performance, right? Most Kathakali performances are actually several hours long. So this is just like one small portion of a much longer tale. Right, so I think like the kind of thing that you might want to like picture when you think about this is almost like a day-long festival, right? So there are a couple of places where this is particularly important in the narrative. Like one is that a Kathakali dancer is on the pickle labels, right? So you've got this intensely localized art form that is being used basically as an advertisement, right, to sell pickles, right? To sell the authenticity of Paradise Pickles as an authentic product of Kerala. Right? So, hey, connoisseurs who are interested in regional cuisines, right? Here's one for you. Yeah. Pickles, illegal banana jam, whatever, right? It's, yeah. But the other way that this is kind of enmeshed in these kind of like capitalist networks is if we look at this, we'll talk a little bit more about the significance of the History House in a minute. But one thing that we know about the History House, that is where Amu and Velutha would meet. It is where Estha and Rahel and Sophie Mall were trying to escape to. But do you recall what the History House is now in the actual present?
I can't remember. I know they talked about it a while back in the story, but I could not remember.
Yeah, so the History House is currently a resort. So let me see if I can find where it is described. So it's the center of an old rubber plantation. It is now a resort, and they have Kathakali performances there, but very brief performances to amuse tourists. So if we look at chapter 12, the chapter called Cochin Tomban, let's go with page 218. June is low season for Kathakali, but there are some temples that a troupe will not pass by without performing in. The Ayamenem temple wasn't one of them, but these days, thanks to its geography, things have changed. In Ayamenem, they danced to jettison their humiliation in the heart of darkness. Their truncated swimming pool performances. They're turning to tourism to stave off starvation. On their way back from the heart of darkness, they stop at the temple to ask pardon of their gods, to apologize for corrupting their stories, for encashing their identities, misappropriating their lives. On these occasions, a human audience was welcome, but entirely incidental. In the broad covered corridor, the colonnaded kutumbalam abutting the heart of the temple where the blue god lived with his flute, the drummers drummed and the dancers danced, their colors turning slowly in the night. Rahel sat down cross-legged, resting her back against the roundness of a white pillar. A tall canister of coconut oil gleamed in the flickering light of the brass lamp. The oil replenished the light. The light lit the tin. It didn't matter that the story had begun. Because Kathakali discovered long ago the secret of the great stories is that they have no secrets. The great stories are the ones you have heard and want to hear again. They don't deceive you with thrills and trick endings. They don't surprise you with the unforeseen. They are as familiar as the house you live in, or the smell of your lover's skin. You know how they end, yet you listen as though you don't. In the way that although you know that one day you will die, you live as though you won't. In the great stories, you know who lives, who dies, who finds love, who doesn't. And yet you want to know again. That is their mystery and their magic. And so what Kathakali conjures up here are these great stories, right? The stories that are told again and again, right? The stories that are lived again and again and again. And I think that the connection here that's made, there is a kind of implicit connection between the stories that are being performed here from the Indian epics and the lives of Rahel, Estha, and their family. Mm-hmm. So, to give you an example of that, right on page 223, perhaps that evening had been a particularly bad one in the heart of darkness. In Ayamenim, the men danced as though they couldn't stop, like children in a warm house sheltering from a storm, refusing to emerge and acknowledge the weather. The wind and thunder, the rats racing across the ruined landscape with dollar signs in their eyes, the world crashing around them. They emerged from one story only to delve deep into another, from Karna Shabadam, Karna's oath, to Duryodhana Vadam, the death of Duryodhana and his brother Dushasana. It was almost 4 a.m. when Bhima hunted down vile Dushasana, the man who had tried to publicly undress the Pandava's wife, Draupadi, after the Kauravas had won her in a game of dice. Draupadi, strangely angry only with the men that won her, not the ones that staked her, has sworn that she will never tie up her hair until it is washed in Dushasana's blood. Bhima has vowed to avenge her honor. Bhima cornered Dushasana in a battlefield already strewn with corpses. For an hour they fenced with each other, traded insults, listed all the wrongs that each had done to the other. When the light from the brass lamp began to flicker and die, they called a truce. Bhima poured the oil, Dushasana cleared the charred wick. Then they went back to war. Their breathless battle spilled out of the Kutumbalam and spun around the temple. They chased each other around the compound, twirling their papier-mâché maces. 2 men in ballooning skirts and balding velvet blouses, vaulting over littered moons and mounds of dung, circling around the hulk of a sleeping elephant. Dushasana full of bravado 1 minute, cringing the next. Bhima toying with him, both stoned. The sky was a rose bowl. The gray, elephant-shaped hole in the universe agitated in its sleep, then slept again. Dawn was just breaking when the brute in Bhima stirred. The drums beat louder, but the air grew quiet and full of menace. In the early morning light, Esthapen and Rahel watched Bhima fulfill his vow to Draupadi. He clubbed Dushasana to the floor. He pursued every feeble tremor in the dying body with his mace, hammering at it until it was stilled, an ironsmith flattening a sheet of recalcitrant metal, systematically smoothing every pit and bulge. He continued to kill him long after he was dead. Then, with his bare hands, he tore the body open. He ripped its innards out and stooped to lap blood straight from the bowl of the torn carcass, his crazed eyes peeping over the rim, glittering with rage and hate and mad fulfillment. Gurgling blood bubbles, pale pink between his teeth, dribbling down his painted face, his neck and chin. When he had drunk enough, he stood up, bloody intestines draped around his neck like a scarf, and went to find Draupadi and bathe her hair in fresh blood. He still had about him the aura of rage that even murder cannot quell. There was madness there that morning, under the rose bowl. It was no performance. Esthapen and Rahel recognized it. They had seen its work before, Another morning, another stage, another kind of frenzy with millipedes on the soles of its shoes. The brutal extravagance of this matched by the savage economy of that. So, what are they remembering as they watch this performance of a tale out of ancient epics? What is this calling to mind for them?
Some type of trauma that they went through.
But a very specific event, right?
Is it Sophie Mall's death?
It's not Sophie Mall's death, right?
Valuth.
It's Valuth's death, yes. So, remember, like, the thing that the character Bhima is upset about here and that he's avenging, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is the unlawful touching of his wife by this other character, Dusasana, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he avenges it at the end of the duel by brutally beating his opponent, not just into submission, but into a bloody pulp, right?
Just like the cops did to Valuth.
What's that?
Just like the cops did to
Just like the cops did to Valuth. Yeah. What's the anagram they use for police here? It's politeness, obedience. Right, politeness, obedience, loyalty, intelligence, courtesy, and efficiency.
It seems like they don't even say money on words.
Yeah, and Bhima is a character, again, we're told on page 225, and if you're familiar with the character, Bhima is a character who is ordinarily good-natured, right? Not ordinarily so bloodthirsty.
That's what
yeah, and so because Bhima is also good-natured most of the time, it also calls to mind their Uncle Chaco's rage after the death of Sophie Mall and his trying to beat down his sister's door when she's locked in the room and his insistence that she go, right? The normally pleasant character.
Snap.
Yeah, snap and driven to rage, yeah.
Yeah. Those be the most dangerous ones, though.
But yeah, so in some ways, it kind of like what Rahel and Esther are going through is like a broken up Kathakali performance, right? They're caught up in one of these tragic great stories. With very little agency. Right? They're being pushed along by history and by family relationships and family resentments that they've got nothing to do with. And are kind of manipulated and maneuvered at every turn. And ultimately robbed of each other in their childhoods, right? And when they come together at the end, I think that on the one hand, it's to try to heal that rift. And also maybe to have actually chosen to do something. Something that it seems that they were never really allowed to do, right? That the only other time that they had really made a choice, right, was to run away. And it was, in Esta's case at least, it wasn't, for him it wasn't even really a choice, right? The orange drink, lemon drink man knew where he lived.
Yeah, and running away was the only thing, but...
Yeah.
I don't even think, even though the orange drink, I cannot remember his name, Even though he knows where he lives, I don't think he would actually. Maybe. Never mind.
Well, but again, like, I think like think like a 7-year-old, right?
You do. You will.
Yeah. Even though no, this guy probably isn't actually going to come after him, right? It's a warning not to tell.
Yeah, and that's probably another reason why he's also silent.
Yeah, that's another. Yeah, I think that's another thing that drives Estad to silence.
Yeah. He deserves the death penalty.
The orange drink, lemon drink man, not
Yes,
Estad.
not the child.
It's, yeah.
Not the child.
Not the
person
7-year-old boy.
that scarred the child.
Yes.
Deserved
Yes.
death.
Mm-hmm. But again, like I think, like in a lot of ways, like what's scarred them
A lot.
is, or at least what the novel seems to think has scarred
The family.
this entire family is history, right? And it's all kind of like, it's all caught up in this history house that is the center of the old rubber plantation across the river. So if we go back to early in the novel, and we see the first mention of the history house, which now I have to remember where the hell it is. It's funny, I remember which side of the book it's on.
It's,
But
you
not
read a
more
lot of
specifically.
different stuff
Yeah.
in the book that have made it kind of hard to keep track of everything.
But anyways, you know, we're told that the history house is.
Is it, I mean, the chapter is called the history house on page 288.
Yeah, but it's first mentioned long before this. It belonged to an Englishman. Who had quote unquote gone native and committed suicide when the boy he was attracted to was sent back to school. So there's a history there of sexual exploitation as well.
Maybe chapter 3.
I think it's in the chapter about Papachi's moth. Here we go. Okay, page 51. Right. So Estad and Rahel had no doubt that the house Chaco meant was the house on the other side of the river, in the middle of the abandoned rubber estate where they had never been. Kari Saipu's house, the Black Sahib, the Englishman who had gone native, who spoke Malayalam and wore mundus. Ayamenem's own Kurtz. Ayamenem, his private heart of darkness. He had shot himself through the head 10 years ago, when his young lover's parents had taken the boy away from him and sent him to school. After the suicide, the property had become the subject of extensive litigation between Kari Saipu's cook and his secretary. The house had lain empty for years. Very few people had seen it, but the twins could picture it, the history house. So, history here is associated with, like, because it's the center of a rubber plantation, economic exploitation. And later on, when the twins go to they see the scarred rubber trees where the material was extracted. And also with sexual exploitation. That this Englishman who began identifying with the locals, was perhaps identifying with them as a form of control, right? Particularly of this young boy to whom he was attracted. So, the history house then eventually, as we've already noted, becomes a resort. A hotel chain buys it. And they have Kathakali short Kathakali performances by the swimming pool for the tourists. Right, okay, here it is. This is what I was looking for, page 119. Further inland, and still across, a 5-star hotel chain had bought the Heart of Darkness. The History House, where mad-breathed ancestors with tough toenails once whispered, could no longer be approached from the river. It had turned its back on IMNM. The hotel guests were ferried across the backwater straight from Cochin. They arrived by speedboat, opening up a V of foam on the water, leaving behind a rainbow film of gasoline. The view from the hotel was beautiful, but here too the water was thick and toxic. No swimming signs had been put up in stylish calligraphy. They had built a tall wall to screen off the slum and prevent it from encroaching on Kari Saibu's estate. There wasn't much they could do about the smell. But they had a swimming pool for swimming, and fresh tandoori pomfret and crepe Suzette on their menu. The trees were still green, the sky still blue, which counted for something. So they went ahead and plugged their smelly paradise, God's own country they called it in their brochures, because they knew, those clever hotel people, that smelliness, like other people's poverty, was merely a matter of getting used to, a question of discipline, of rigor and air conditioning, nothing more. Does this sound familiar at all? Are you hearing echoes here of anything else that we've read?
A small place.
Yeah, that same kind of condemnation of the tourist economy, right? Mm-hmm. What does the tourist economy, or setting up a tourist economy, according to this logic, require you to accept? What do you have to let people do to the place where you live?
Get used to everything that's there. Like, get used to whatever you see, basically. Like, oh, you smell the bad stuff. Oh, just get used to it.
But like the poverty locally to the people who visit the resort is only a smell, right? Mm-hmm. They never actually see it because they land at the airport in Cochin and are ferried there from there directly to the hotel, right? They never have to go through the town.
Nope.
The speedboat leaves a rainbow film of gasoline on the river.
Gross.
The water is thick and toxic. There's a wall to prevent the local slum from encroaching on the hotel estate, right? Mm-hmm. So this place is, polluting the shit out of the river and cutting itself off from local life, right? While at the same time using local culture, right? The Kathakali dancers to wring a few extra bucks out of these tourists. And there are reminders here that something horrible happened in this place 20 years ago. Right. The back veranda of the History House on page 121, where a posse of touchable policemen converged, where an inflatable goose was burst, had been enclosed and converted into the airy hotel kitchen. Nothing worse than kebabs and caramel custard happened there now. The terror was past, overcome by the smell of food, silenced by the humming of cooks, the cheerful chopping of ginger and garlic, the disemboweling of lesser mammals, pigs, goats, the dicing of meat, the scaling of fish. Something lay buried in the ground, under grass, under 23 years of June rain. A small, forgotten thing. Nothing that the world would miss. A child's plastic wristwatch with the time painted on it. 10 to 2, it said. So, this same back veranda, where the kitchen of the hotel is now, is where Esta and Rahel watched Belutha be beaten to death. So, this hotel is built on a legacy of violence, right? You have these kind of the original imperialist violence, Kari Saipu's violence, the beating of Belutha, and then the destruction of the local environment. So, oh, okay. Do you need one?
No, I have
Okay.
one. I'm just gotta get it to work now.
Take mine.
It's the third pin this week that's died. Pins are not reliable. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny you say things are not reliable, because the thing I wanted to settle on here is the child's plastic wristwatch with the time painted on it, right? 10 to 2 it said. So now this is not a real watch, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't tell accurate time. It always points to the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that this watch that always points to the same time is buried underneath this hotel.
Dead body over there.
Well, not anymore. They actually they dragged Belutha off to the prison.
Did the guy commit suicide in his house though?
Yeah, and there's the story that Belutha's father tells about having pinned the guy's ghost to a tree with his machete, right?
Technically, it is a dead body in the house because he killed himself in the house.
Yeah.
And Belutha's ghost is still there because he died there.
Yeah. People have died in this house, yes, violently.
And they still.
I
I think a lot of things that's built, like, there's some dark history to it.
Sure.
And I knows about it, so.
And I think that like the whole point of that watch that always points to the same time is that like time has not moved on here, right? Everything is still the same. This is the same shit that was going on when this house was originally built, when this plantation was originally planted, right? So all of this, right, this resort that they now call heritage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But whose heritage are we talking about?
The owner who had the house first.
Yeah, it's the heritage here is it's a white colonialist heritage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Toy histories for rich tourists to play in. But yeah, again, like the point of the watch being buried here is again like this is the same story being repeated over and over again, right?
Yep.
It's one of these great stories in which there are no surprises.
Mm-hmm.
Because you already know who lives, who dies, who falls in love, who wins, who loses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the same story keeps getting told again and again and again.
Mm-hmm. I get the pen work.
All right, so that's about all I have for you for today. Do you have any questions?
No, sir.
All right, then we'll see you Wednesday.
Yeah, there's your pen.
Okay.